Welcome to Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. I'll be covering every studio song the band has recorded and every bonus track that I can find. Each week we'll go over a new song from the beginning to where they are currently, and as they keep adding albums, I'll keep adding shows. Let the deep dive party begin.
In the magic garden, some were singing, some were dancing. There've been some changes in my time. This one's playing games with my mind. Stopped in my tracks, no thought of looking back. The lady's got me tied up. I've already made my mind up. One way or another, she'll be mine.
Okay, so that falsetto there at the beginning was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't want to be critical, but it sounds like he went a little flat there at the end.
Yeah, I thought so too. That last part, it was like he was kind of searching for that note a little bit. And I always thought that was odd. Why didn't they redo that? But it is interesting to start a song for the first half of a line in a falsetto and then drop down to your natural voice, to go back to the falsetto. I love that sound, though. It's not something I can think of another example of a song doing.
No, either you start in falsetto and you stay there, or you end up there. You don't usually start in falsetto and then move.
Exactly. But I love the sound of his voice on here. It sounds really rich and strong. It really sounds good with the guitar and the keyboard. I love the balance of the mix.
And the bass did start to get a little bit more adventurous there in the middle of the chorus, or in the middle of the verse. So
yes. And I love that way that they broke it up. They're like using half of the pattern from the main riff, and then they're changing on the other half of it. So you get a little bit of similarity and familiarity, but you also get a little bit of variety. Like they're not just going to keep doing things the same way.
No. And again, I think this has to do with what we're used to now, where you record the chorus and the verse and you copy and paste it in Pro Tools and you got half the song already done. Then you have to do the pre-chorus, the bridge, the solo, the come out of the bridge out of the solo, repeat the chorus a few times and you're done.
Yeah. And if you have a band that really cares, then you actually have at least the singer overdub a different different inflections and things over a couple of days, or you just have them do 3 or 4 recordings of the first one and you slap them on to the repeats.
But when you're doing that, it could have been just what happened when they were playing it. They just felt it and it took off, and they were like, hey, that actually kind of worked, including his looking for the note there at the end.
Right. Or I don't know if how often this happens to other people, but I've had some instances where I've had just some happy accidents where I'm about to do one thing, I completely botch it and do something else, but that botch turns out to be a much better idea, and I just go with it.
Yeah, I can think of lots of stories where the botch is the thing that stays. And even when I was doing some studio work, I did a few things where I was like, man, that really wasn't what you wanted. And I'm getting ready to tell them, let's back it up and punch me in again here. And they're like, why? That was awesome. But it was wrong. It's way wrong. It's not even what we talked about. I'm like, yeah, but it's really good. I'm like, all right, whatever. You're paying me.
Have you ever, you're a harmonica player. Have you ever had an instance where you've grabbed the wrong key of harmonica and then they change the song?
Yes. Actually, it's happened to me live. The worst is when the guitar player is playing like slide guitar, and through the course of the night, it becomes detuned.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's pushing on the strings, and it just applies to guitars do. They come out of tune.
Right. Yeah.
And midway through, all of a sudden, you sound like garbage, even though you're playing the right keys, but his guitar is no longer there. But they're not going to blame him.
Right.
Because it all works still for him. It's me that sounds off because it's moved.
Well, you're the new sound. You're the new sound being introduced, as opposed to where our ears are comfortable with this guitar, so it's got to be right. Now you're bringing in something that's making it awkward, so it's your fault. Yeah, I could see that,
and that's rough. And then there are times where I was in the studio and they said, bring an A and an E and a C. Luckily, I brought everything because when I got there, it was in D.
Right. Yeah, it's not like you have, guitars that are tuned differently and you have to bring a whole bunch of cases. You just bring your one case with all your harmonicas in it, and You have everything at your disposal. Because what if in the course of recording the song, they're like, you know what? I think the song would be much better if we did it in G. And then you'd be stuck. You'd be like, well, you didn't tell me to bring a G.
And there are other times where my favorite was there was a song where they wanted me to solo. And I'm like, hey, how about if I do this in a harmonic minor instead? Instead of just keeping it where we are. That way it adds another level of interest. And the guy's like, you can do that? Like, yeah, hey, hold on. So I pulled a harmonic minor out and did it. And they're like, whoa. So, being able to understand the circle of fifths and a little bit of music theory and know how to do, harmonica math as far as what keys work together, that does pay off. So even an instrument that basically is just tune breathing, you still have to pay attention to.
And I almost feel sometimes like this band just had a dartboard of the circle of fifths and they would just throw 3 darts at it and go, here's what we're putting into the song and we're going to make it work. Because some of these combinations, I don't know how they would have arrived. Yeah. They're all interesting and they're all very tasteful, but how did you get there?
Yeah. And this is before the Guitar Institute. This is before like lots of hardcore rock and roll guitar theory classes came out. So the things he's doing, either he learned from an actual guitar player, like not a rock and roll guitar player, or he stumbled on himself, which again, lesson or instinct, either way, it works out.
Yeah. And the end result that we get to enjoy is something, full of surprises.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm sure they were surprised for on occasion too.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Like I'd probably look at one another and go, where did you just go with that? And, and then
can you do that again?
Yeah.
Now?
And then the worst part is, what did I just do?
Uh-huh.
When you're like, I created magic by accident and I have no idea what it was.
It's like people who write in the studio and then they have to go back and learn what they wrote so they can go on tour.
Yeah. That seems to happen a lot now. I was listening to the documentary sort of thing that Deep Purple did on their newest album, Whoosh. And a lot of it, that's just how they do it now. They write the songs, pretty much just go and record them. And then they're like, all right, we're going to listen back, figure out which ones we might want to do live. We'll learn how to play them. And I went, you just wrote it.
Yeah. No, Dream Theater is notorious for that. They've been doing that since Metropolis.
And that band of all bands you would think would be so well rehearsed before you record it because they're so technical.
Yeah. No, I think Jordan might be the only one that walks in with notes. I think everybody else is just going as they go.
Yeah. That just boggles my mind. I had the pleasure of seeing them live and they just blew me away. Just the technical perfection that those guys have is just, it's so far beyond me.
Yeah.
But, I own musical
Usually instead of seeing them live, I just spill a beer on myself and listen to a CD because they're not going to make mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you might as well not pay for the ticket. Yeah. All right, well, let's see where we go next. Okay, so now you're getting that adventurous bass I promised you.
He found the note that time.
Yes, he did.
He found the note both times, but the second time for sure he found it because then he was able to modulate and add a little bit of vocal blah, 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 magic to it.
It did feel more comfortable, and it still kind of baffles me that they didn't just go in and cut that first line back in again.
Yeah, they could have punched him in easily once he found it.
Very much, yeah. But I love where this is going. I love that they don't settle for this is how the verse goes. They're putting changes in there. They're doing different things. They really know how to keep a song interesting.
And the thing is, he nailed that first falsetto note. He nailed exactly as he did the first one. So that's not him looking for that note. He knows that note.
Right. Yeah. And he brings it so smoothly into his natural voice. It doesn't feel like an awkward.
He's able to transition out of falsetto into his regular voice seamlessly, because there's a lot of people who have to shift where the voice is, and that takes effort to shift in your head where the voice is. And when you hear him shift from, falsetto into his regular, chest, front voice kind of thing, it's seamless. You don't hear any change.
Right. And you can always tell those singers if you see videos of them in the studio, because you won't see them do it live, but you'll see them in the studio where they've got their hand out and they're raising and lowering their hand to guide their voice where the pitch is on the scale.
Actually making physical contact to make sure it's coming from where they want it to.
Right. Yeah. Because you can easily slip into the wrong part of your voice and then not be able to get yourself out of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I love that the song is not a high, fast tempo, but it's got a real power to it, I think.
Yeah. It's one of those ones, I mean, knowing it's from the mid-'70s, I keep thinking of people with bell bottoms at a roller rink.
Yeah, I could see that. I never had the bell bottoms, but I did spend a good chunk of my time on roller skates.
And this feels like it's the one of those ones that if you were in the right city at the right time, this would have been one of those ones that the guy at the roller rink always played and everyone remembered, oh, this is that guy's song that he always plays. We're all going to go out because the DJ at the roller rink picks this every night. This is his pick.
Right. Now, at the time, of course, that I first heard this, I didn't know that this voice would go on to sing famous songs like Heat of the Moment and Only Time Will Tell, with Asia. Just a really good, strong voice, really unique, but not unique where it's annoying. It's got a very pleasant tone to it.
So he's playing bass at the same time as he's singing this?
He is, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's, when I think about a bass player joining Uriah Heep, the very first bass player, Paul Newton, was very adventurous. He really set the tone for what this band would be. And it's like their vocal harmonies. It's one of the things that really sets them apart is their bass playing. And then when Gary Thane joined, you had to look at that as, wow, this is going to be a lot of busy playing, because this is the style of the band. And then when he was no longer in the band and John took over, it's kind of like I would look at that as a musician and go, this is either going to be fun or this is going to be a disaster, because that is a lot of responsibility on me to play to the level that they're expecting. And I think it takes a certain amount of guts to even audition for a band.
Oh, yeah.
Where you're expected to be able to do those kind of things, because it's really out of the norm.
It's like when Portnoy quit Dream Theater, the people who auditioned for that, they might not have all gotten it. But the people who auditioned and actually really auditioned, that's a set of stones to try to fit into a pair of shoes that not only is a great drummer, but a personality in the band as well.
Oh, for sure. Because there's so much more than just your talent. I mean, you have to be somebody they can get along with, somebody they feel they can create with, somebody they can travel with. There's so many elements. But it's interesting that you bring that up, because I've seen some of those audition tapes. They're on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And some of them you're like, did you even listen to the song? Do you even know it at all? Are you just trying to show what you would do with it? Show you could play the song first.
Yep.
Then say, hey,
show off later. Then show off later.
Do you mind if we
show off?
Yeah. Let me show you how I can learn a song that you guys did. Now let me show you how I would have played it. And then you can get a feel for me within the context of this. And there were some auditions that were just brilliant. And I think it was like 2 or 3 guys they had narrowed it down to. And I don't even know how they chose between them, because any one of them would have fit in well.
I keep thinking that I keep kind of in the back of my head wishing that Marco Miniman had gotten it, because I think he would have added some musical information that Marco has, because Marco's a talented dude.
Yeah. I was kind of surprised they didn't pick him, actually, because I thought he would have fit in very well from a performance and a writing standpoint. It's great if you can have somebody come in and show they can learn the song. But how are you going to write with us? That to me is always the biggest thing.
Yep. Yeah. And I think I like Mangini. I think Mangini's great. I think he's a hell of a drummer. He was a teacher at Berkeley. I mean, hats off to Mangini. But as far as like personality, Marco seems cool. I'd want to hang out with Marco.
Oh yeah, I would absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. The drummer in this band, Lee Kerslake, went on to play with Ozzy Osbourne. He was on Crazy Train and some of those early ones, and then there was this whole debacle. But very solid drummer. He knows when to lay back. He knows when to push forward. I've always thought his drum fills were very tasteful. Yeah, I love that interplay between, bouncing the stick on the snare and the toms. That's always a role that's going to be a hit with me.
Yeah. It's nice when a drummer is playing musically. They're not just playing rhythm. They're not just keeping time. When a drummer can actually play musically and people can tell they're playing musically, not just like, okay, I'm a clock, I'm a metronome. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. When it becomes musical, that's when a drummer becomes more than the sum of their parts.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you could be a perfect metronome like a Ringo Starr, or you could be, you know, somebody who's going to be a little more, have a little more influence into the shape of the song. What's interesting to me is he's playing, you know, the standard 5-piece kit. And I always wondered if he had a couple of more rack toms and had a little bit more melodic choices, how he might have played. Because I think that can really open up some things for drummers, especially in a band like this. It's so melodic already.
And he could have also, I mean, you don't know what he's doing with his stuff. I mean, he could have been putting pressure on the sticks with one hand, on the skins with one hand. He could have been doing things to detune and retune the drums throughout to create different sound just by putting pressure and muffling and covering certain things. I mean, there's tricks, but most drummers just play and they do what they do well.
And very much where you hit the drum. If you hit it in the center, you're going to get a certain sound. If you hit it an inch in either direction, you're going to get a completely different sound. So yeah, there is a lot of control that you need to have a sound as consistent as he gets. I love it. But I would have been curious to see if he had more melodic choices. What like I think of a drummer like Phil Collins, who has a lot of smaller toms and in different ranges. And when you hear him play, he has a lot more that he can add to a song. But you know, this certainly works, and he's keeping it very interesting. But
and also, it makes it something where you can hear it and then sit down. If you're of the mind, sit down and play it yourself. You don't need a specialized kit. You already have that basic kit in your closet or wherever you have your drum set up, and you don't need extra toms. You don't need a trigger. You don't need double bass. You don't need fancy pedals. You've got it all there, and you could be doing Uriah Heep bass or drum tracks easily and learn from those.
Very true. And one other interesting thing about Lee is he very rarely plays his ride cymbal. He's pretty much a hi-hat snare kick guy.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. So let's see what happens next. That is a different singer. They sound somewhat similar, but that would be Ken Hensley, who's the keyboard player of the band. And I know if I'm wrong, a bunch of people are going to write in and tell me so, but he's a little more nasally and just has a different sound to his voice. So I'm pretty sure that's Ken singing that part, but I love the change up here.
Yeah. So they moved into what feels like a halftime with the modulation into this. But the reason I was smiling is because there at the end when the other voices kick in, that's when this thing becomes very much attached to its time. Because that particular type of chorus or the vocal choir and that particular chord structure within that is very indicative. And like that could have been pulled from any number of musicals that came out in the 70s. It could be pulled from any number of songs from the 70s. That really hangs it very much in its time period.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because these are about the most laid back chorus section that you'll hear in Uriah Heep. A lot of times they're doing their own vocals that counterbalance the lead singer. They're doing a lot more dynamically. This is just more of an angelic that they're doing over this.
It sounds, I mean, when I'm hearing that, my first thought was, I heard that in Godspell. I've heard that in any number of things that came out during that period of time. And it's very, that right there, up until then, it sounded like it could have been recorded in the 70s, but still it was timeless. So as soon as you hit that choir, it kind of hangs it directly in that period of time.
Right. Yeah, I would say in this case, for sure, it's a little bit different than what we're used to hearing from them. And I would agree. It sounds very much, very similar to the musicals. I also like what the guitars are doing here. There's some nice dynamics that they're playing.
Those legato moves are nice, and the modulation was interesting because I didn't think it was going to modulate, but when it did, I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense and it's comfortable and ready to go.
Yeah, and it's not overplaying. It's not trying to override the vocals or anything or not show off. It's really supportive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then of course, the bass is all over the place, just kind of meandering up and down the scale, which is always a joy for me to listen to with these guys.
And maybe that's why they switched vocalists, is so that he could actually go and do something a little bit more fun with the bass and think about it and not think about singing.
Yeah, because when you're writing, you have to think about potential performance. I mean, you're a band that's more on tour than you are in the studio, so you want to make the song as good as it can be, but you kind of have to be thinking about how would we do this live, So anyway, I think we're about to hear a guitar solo.
Okay.
I love that drum fill, but I'm going to say that's 3 guitars.
Oh, it sounds like they've doubled them easy. Do they have twin guitars in the band, or is it just one?
The keyboard player also plays guitar.
Was he good enough to play in sync? Like the twin guys from like Iron Maiden?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they do that from time to time.
Okay. So it sounds like they probably doubled the 2 guitars to give that big sound. The thing that was interesting for me was it sounded like that was more Southern rock influence in the rest of the song. It sounded like something pulled from a Lynyrd Skynyrd tune.
Yeah, it did have a little bit more of a string bendy kind of feel to it. That's pretty common with Mick, though. He does like to bend the strings. And I think they doubled the main guitar, and then I think there was a third guitar that was playing, above it. But normally they're panned pretty far left and right to where you can hear that separation, but here they kind of blended them together a little bit. I think it sounds good.
Yeah, it was very much in the same sonic space, but yeah, I was taken back by the twin guitar sound, the attack, and then the almost Southern rock sound of the solo. All he was missing was a couple slide notes in there, and it would have been something right out of a Skynyrd song.
Right, and then to be singing about Jim Beam or something.
Yeah.
But I love the way it just kind of
doesn't like Southern men. Let's keep that straight. They don't like Southern men.
There you go. But it just kind of comes out of nowhere. It's just like this addition that's all of a sudden there, and it doesn't really feel out of place. It really blends nicely in.
Well, it's also interesting because as far as the note range goes, it fits exactly in where the vocals have been.
Right. Yeah, they tend to do that. They're like, okay, there's no vocalist. That's what we're coloring in that shade, but we're also going to put in a little bit of what you would expect out of this instrument.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple of guitarists have said this, and I was on a Zoom call with Steve Morse one time, and he was saying that my job as a guitarist when I'm doing a solo is to do equal or better than what the vocal was doing that I'm replacing. Yeah. And I thought, that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah. It reminds me, when I hear that statement, it reminds me of the solo, the back half of the solo in Blackened by Metallica, because he does the vocal line, but it's flashier and more, Kurty.
Right.
And, but he does the exact vocal line, but he flashes it up. And that's exactly what he did. He replaced the vocals, but made them a little flashy.
Right. And that's such a comfortable space to play in. When I've done it as a keyboard player, I don't know as a guitarist, I would assume it's the same, but it's just a very comfortable thing because you have a framework to work off of, and then you can kind of go, okay, now what do I want to build around that? Or what do I feel in this moment, in this take, and be really natural. So yeah, it's good stuff. You know what I just realized? I always knew that they did something with the lead vocal on this, but it sounds like there's one take in the dead center and there's a second track just to the left.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, I always knew that there was an effect. I wasn't sure if it was like a chorus or a doubler or what it was, but that's kind of what I'm hearing now.
Yep. I also, has the tempo picked up?
It does feel like it's a little faster.
I mean, drummers do that naturally, especially if they're not a click. I mean, if you go back and listen to like We Can Work It Out, it starts out one way, and by the end, they've half sped it up by half.
Right. Yeah, you had a lot of freedom back then because
what happened.
Yeah, you weren't stuck. It was very natural, and that's another bit of proof that the band is looking at each other and playing this together and not doing
because
separate takes.
It feels like it's a little bit snappier, and I don't know if it's just natural coming out of the solo and it's built into the song, or if it's just what happens when you come out of the solo and you're wrapping it up.
Yeah. I definitely feel like it's a little more, just a little more sped up than it was originally. But it feels very consistent. I don't feel like they've lost anything in the song.
I'm not saying it's and it's a gradual build. It's not like he went pop, 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 and then all of a sudden he's playing triple time or whatever. This is I'm keeping time, but because the human being can only keep the certain time for so long, things will slow down and speed up. And typically in rock music, because it's rock music, you speed up. And it's not by huge measures, it's by incremental measures. And it's almost imperceptible because we're stopping and starting it.
Right. Yeah.
You can pick it up a little easier.
But I think too, what I meant by that was that the bass isn't straying from the drums at all. They're still just as tight.
They're still looking at each other.
Yeah. So as the drummer is speeding up, the bass player is right there with him, just keeping that locked in. It's really impressive. And again, thinking about doing this with just musicians playing their parts and being musicians, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. This is one that it must have been a setup where they were recording bass and drum together, then maybe guitar came in after, and then vocals came in its own studio. They didn't, I mean, no one was in their own room doing this one, but they probably did break it up because the bass and drum probably were done together.
I would imagine, though, that the guitar player and the keyboard, well, the keyboards wouldn't have been in the booth, but you're not going to be dragging a Hammond into a booth, but the guitar was probably following along on a scratch track in the recording room, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah. Well, now you're going to get to hear a little more of the dynamics of the vocals as we head towards the end of the song.
Oh, the classic 70 studio fade.
Yeah, it was a long fade. That was almost a 45-second fade.
But yeah, that's what it's always impresses me when I hear those kind of things at the end, because they repeat them over and over again perfectly. Yeah. And in this case, they probably did it twice as long as we heard because they had to build the studio fade into it.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're so consistent and so perfect on every pass. And then you've got, these really nice little bass licks that are filling in here and there. And it makes me want to not have the song fade out. It makes me wonder, well, what else did he play that I'm not hearing? Because it was getting interesting, But yeah, pretty common of this era to have those long fade outs. But I love those vocal little bits that we're hearing here and there. I'm not sure which one's singing.
High vocal added a lot of interest.
Yeah, it was a little more in the background than in the original. What we're listening to is the remastered version on the deluxe issue. I went back and got all of those because they had the bonus tracks on them that the original albums didn't have. So it's a little bit further in the background than it was in the version I'm used to, but really it adds almost a haunting quality to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to admit I might have to seriously consider putting them on the Soundography list.
Oh, nice.
And I'll blame you for it.
I think I can live with that. If I've turned you on to a new band with your vast catalog of knowledge, I'm certainly happy to do that. Obviously, I have a pretty big passion. I'm doing a whole damn podcast about the band, which is going to be 300 and some episodes when, at least as I am still discovering songs I didn't know about. But yeah, I'm glad you like the song. It's a good rock and roller, but it has some nice, unique things to it that really, show off the signature sounds of the band.
If you probably couldn't have picked a better entry level song for me. I mean, if it was too basic, it would have been, oh, what is this? Just like Steve Miller with better money.
Right. Yeah.
Or if you picked something too adventurous, and I've been, okay, so these guys are trying to be a prog band, but they're not. They're trying to be UFO. So finding a good middle ground that had all the elements. Actually picked a pretty good entry-level song for me.
Good. Perfect. I'm glad that you say that, because they have a lot of songs that are very progressive. Then they have other ones that are a little more, mellow than this. Their albums are a very interesting collection of songs. Some of them you can tell are very cohesive, and some of them it's like, okay, they wrote like 3 really gentle songs that they're interweaving with harder songs. It's really an interesting adventure to listen to each album, because they're very much varied in what you're getting overall.
Did they ever do a concept album?
They kind of did. There was an album called The Magician's Birthday that, from what I read from the keyboard player Ken Hensley, who wrote the bulk of it, started out to be a concept album, but really didn't finish that way. But I think that they certainly could have. They had albums I would say were somewhat themed, but not as like a cohesive story. Yeah. But that could have been very interesting.
Yeah. All right.
I always like when bands do that. But overall, what do you think of, what would you say about the song if somebody else were to ask you what you thought of it?
I liked it. I liked it a lot. And I found it, I'm glad you stopped it where you stopped it, because you were able to piece out the various interesting parts. And what was really interesting is that the verse only repeated like twice, right? He only did 2 verses.
Yeah, they're really short too.
And then we had the bridge, we had the solo, and then we had the coming out of the solo into the end, the final chorus, which repeated, what was that, 6 times?
Oh, at least, yeah.
So, when you think about it, it's very bite-sized, but in that time, they packed enough in there for us to talk for, quite a while.
Yet, believe it or not, that song is 4 minutes and 42 seconds.
Wow.
Well, I would say 4 minutes until you get to that end that just repeats, because that fade out was about 45 seconds.
Yeah.
But it's amazing sometimes in songs how quickly that time passes. Yeah. And then there's other songs that are 2 minutes and 15 seconds, and I'm like, that was sitting here. Yeah. Yeah, nothing I've reviewed here.
I skipped through 1 minute and 30 seconds of this really long song.
Yeah, exactly. But yet then they have a song that's 16 minutes long and one that's 12 minutes long, and you get out of those and you're like, how did 12 minutes of my life just pass by? It felt like 3 or 4 at most.
Yeah. There are some bands that I listen to that churn out, epics, 35, 45-minute songs. And one of my favorite albums of all time is Fate's Warning's Pleasant Shade of Grey, which is one 60-minute song.
Right.
Broken into different pieces. Mm-hmm. And I love that album because it's one thing, and it tells this story, and it takes you on this journey. But I also really enjoy those ones that can do it in 3 minutes, 4 minutes.
Yeah. It's nice to have that variety, though. Sometimes you just want to kick back and just put something on and just kind of like let yourself go in it. And if the song's only 3 minutes, you're really just getting immersed into it. If you're listening to something that's a little more epic, thinking even of a song like Master of Puppets is what, 10 something, I think.
I thought it was something.
Is it?
Is it? I don't remember. It runs between 8 and 10. Let's just call it that.
Okay. So to be able to just say, I want to invest in this. I want to just sit here and just get lost in this. And I have plenty of time to do that. And I could just let go. Whereas if I were to listen to a shorter song, I'm like, well, I was ready to let go and it's over. So
yeah,
but all we have to listen to is what they gave us. And we just choose what we want to do with it. But I really like this band. I love the dynamics. I love the adventure of the instruments. I love the fact that the solos are very much within the context, whether they're a blistering fast solo or something more like we heard today. always within the context of the song. I'm not a fan of guitar players that just like to play fast and kind of forget what song they're playing.
And that, it's interesting you say that, because I've also run across that with harmonica players. I mean,
really,
someone like Huey Lewis, who roots himself very much in blues, he plays a certain type of blues, but when he decides to pick it up, he picks it up for a reason. When John Popper plays, there are times when he's just raining notes down on you. And after a while, you're like, all right, you can play fast. But then in the next song, he actually comes up with this amazing hook that this actual harmonica riff. And you're like, wow. And then there are other people who just noodle fast, and they're just kind of pyrotechnics for pyrotechnic's sake. And that's fine. But at the same time, you need to be able to show, like with John Popper, he's really good at, yes, he can play his nuts off when he's playing fast, but he also knows how to write a hook and a melody line and an actual riff that's catchy. And then, so everyone's got their thing, but every now and then you just run into someone who's like, okay, you play fast. You're the Yngwie Malmsteen of harmonicas. Yay.
Right. Yeah. I don't mind fast if it fits the context of the song. It's when it just, like, you could cut that solo out and paste it into any other song because you're not even focused on anything, including the tempo. Yeah. You're just playing to play. That's
not made that mistake. I have totally been that guy.
Have you?
When I played live in college, I can point to 2 or 3 recordings I have in my archive of me being that guy. So I'm not blameless, but I also learned.
Well, that's the difference, is that didn't become your style. You're not like the crazy harmonica player.
Yeah.
No, that's good. I'm so glad that this was the episode that worked out for us to record, because you're right. I do think this is a good gateway drug into the world of Uriah Heep.
Yeah, this is good.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I can't tell you enough how much I've enjoyed your show, and I just wish you the greatest of continued success. You'll have to come back on at some point and do another song with us.
Oh, I'd love to. This is great. This is a lot of fun.
Excellent. I'll send you over a couple of recommendations too, to kind of see the scope of the band and see a little bit more varied efforts that they put out. But this has always been a song that I've loved. I love that falsetto part. I love the way it just merges into his natural voice. I think the riff is nice and strong, but not overbearing. I think everything is just very complimentary and a great mix.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm glad that you picked this one. This was good.
Excellent. Well, you take care, my friend. Come back and see us for sure.
All right. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Take care, buddy.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. If you have enjoyed this show, please consider going over to Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast outlet, leaving a rating or a review. Be sure to subscribe to make sure that you are notified when new episodes are available. Please be sure to share this podcast with your fellow Uriah Heep enthusiasts and anyone who you think would like Uriah Heep, which should be everyone. And if you are so inclined, please feel free to contribute to the Patreon account. And if you are not a Patreon subscriber, you can also pay through the PayPal link on the website listed in the show links below. I would also like to thank Uriah Heep for their very generous support of the show, and thank you guys for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Happy days!